Hey there, folks, and welcome back to the Northern Football Podcast, episode 218 on Northern Football here. Ben Steiner alongside Brendan Dunlop and Alex Gongiruzik. And a bit of a quieter week in Canadian soccer. I know I've said that before, but this week it was actually a challenge going through the rundown and trying to put it together to see just what we had to talk about. And we've got some interesting names that we haven't mentioned in years on the podcast that we're going to talk about today. But it did seem like a little bit of a quieter week, which is fine by me because I've got a pretty busy life right now.
Well, Ben, just open your email. There might be something from FIFA that's the longest press release you've ever seen and explains 7 different initiatives, all within one 3,000-word press release.
I say, speak for yourself when you say it's not busy. Like, we can dive into the Halifax Wanderers new kits. They look great. Like, we can dive into some other stories that we're not talking about. There's always something. So I think what do they always say? When a hole opens up, an opportunity will arise or something like that. And I mean, this just means we get to talk about some things we haven't talked about in a while. Isn't that always fun, Ben?
And we've got a whole bunch of analogies this week. We've got that one from you, which doesn't quite make sense. Doug Ford was talking about the American bobsled team on Tariff Day yesterday. So certainly not a quiet week in everything but Canadian soccer. But we'll dive into.
Did he bring up Kaylee Humphries though? It's not a conversation about bobsled if Kaylee Humphries' name doesn't come up.
She's still sliding too. With the American team, of course, but she's going to be a medal contender in monobob at the 2026 Olympics in Milano Cortina, which is exactly why people
coded thing you've ever said. She's still sliding.
Yeah, honestly, I love that he answered my question that he doesn't probably have the answer to with like a great X Twitter fact. You answered my question with a tweet that you would tweet.
Yeah, probably. If you search Kaylee Humphries on my Twitter, you'd probably find a decent amount of stuff there. But
quick mention. There's a good joke to Kaylee Humphries there.
I mean, just no, or Ben is completely irrelevant, but it's like the handshake emoji on Twitter, and it's like Kaylee Humphries, Sol Campbell, and that slide tackle from like 2006, still sliding. If you haven't seen that Sol Campbell slide tackle, very niche.
I like that. We are very niche on this. There will be people that Google Doug Ford and wonder the relevance as well. But here's something that I didn't expect last May when Jesse Marsch was hired. I didn't expect to feel more proud to be Canadian as an American leads the national team. It has nothing to do with his nationality, to be fair. But I just didn't think in that period that I would have that type of surge feeling. And I definitely didn't expect to wake up to some American television interview with Doug Ford and be like, wow, Doug makes me more proud to be Canadian today with his responses to the tariffs and how we were going to handle things in Ontario. And I had no idea that Ontario would be the third largest trading partner on the continent with the U.S., by the way, on the planet. No idea how big Ontario is. So there you go, BC boys. Fly my own provincial flag for a second.
If you want to go even further down the niche way, I mean,
Nobody does.
Canada's flag used to look a lot like Ontario, so we could have some pride in the old Canadian flag, I guess, as well. It was just Flag Day as well, but we'll get into the Canadian sporting side and soccer side of it. I know that not all of you are necessarily looking to go further into the tariffs, considering where we are in just international relations in this country right now. But we'll jump into the soccer. Jesse Marsch made those comments last week. We haven't had a chance to talk about them here on the podcast.
Really? That feels like a month ago. Those comments feel like a month.
Your response, Brendan?
It was a month ago, February. It's already March, man.
Yeah,
crazy.
Good point, man. Yeah, there you go. Look at that. Sharp. I thought it was, much like Alistair Johnson echoed and Sam Adekubi, I think his feelings represented a lot more Canadians than people south of the border would seem to think. I think that the opinions he was reflecting, albeit not a Canadian himself, really represented a vast majority of Canadians. And as I say, I was proud to hear it, and I've been very proud of how Jesse Marsch has represented himself in this job, how he's represented the country and the national team, and he didn't have to make those comments, and he doesn't have to get pulled into that. And he's been very open before, and certainly hasn't shied away to expressing kind of his political views and maybe his leaning, but I do think that it connects with the more of the core values that we have as Canadians and want to uphold, regardless of your political affiliations. And this kind of feels like a moment in time here where in Canada we should put the bipartisan feelings aside because it's all of Canada that's really under attack or being being persecuted and being bullied. So it's great to see the country kind of coming together in a lot of ways, and the fact that the Jesse Marsch was a catalyst in that to bring the conversation into a side of the sports world that I didn't think it would be at. I did think that we'd kind of obviously be a narrative if the U.S. beat Panama and Mexico, lose to Canada, and they play on March 23rd in the Nations League final. But I didn't think it would be a narrative at this point, and I think that Canada have represented themselves pretty well.
So
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was big credit. To me, it was big credit to the journalists that asked, because there weren't any Canadian journalists, I don't think, at the event. And at least, based on the accent, it was, a Latino journalist that asked the question and was plugged into the hockey scene, was plugged into the Canada-US political scene. And yes, it's a major international storyline, but still, we're in Canada, so it makes a bigger impact on our daily lives than it even does south of the border. So I was impressed by that, and I was impressed by Marsch's response. I thought that was needed. I thought that was needed not just from an American coaching the Canadian national team, but just anybody had to say that within the sporting realm. We've had the questions of the American players being booed and their thoughts on the anthems. We've had the questions to the hockey players, but there hasn't been that follow-up about the actual sort of political scenario and what it means to the sovereignty, to the financial repercussions in the country, and just the bullying that's coming from below the 49th parallel. Marsch addressed all of that in a way that the hockey players didn't, in a way that Brian White didn't when he was asked by Canadian Soccer Daily's Harjo Hell on the weekend about the booing of the American anthem. But I credit to the journalist for asking, and credit to Marsch for taking it in full stride and having something to say about that, because I think that's what Canada need to hear. Brennan?
Just a quick point on that. I do think that I love that Har's been contributing to Canadian Soccer Daily and was able to ask that question. I don't think that the responsibility is on Brian White or other Americans to have an opinion on that. I think that he handled that pretty well as well. But I just wanted to be clear that I don't need every American who plays in Canada to speak on that. But if they feel a need to speak on that, and also as well, if they actually, feel that the way Trump is talking is okay, or they, I wouldn't want someone to feel that they have to censor themselves either. I think that I would love for there to be a point where we have productive discourse again, that you can have disagreements and conversations without being at war every time you have a disagreement of things, right? It's we've seen it get that way in the sports world, the talking head culture. Everything is so polarized and opposed. I am yearning for a period where it's not so polarizing anymore, that it's okay to have disagreements. And then, you know what, I was thinking this last night playing co-ed league soccer. We won 3-2, by the way, very late goal, and there was a real dick on the other team. And we've all played, whether it's hockey or soccer, against someone like this. And you have a real heated go, and then the final whistle goes, and you have to shake hands like children. And how rare it is that it kicks off in the handshake line, because you put it aside. And if there was beers there, if the referee pulled out a table and a cooler of beers, you'd probably have a beer and then laugh about the thing that you got so upset about, where you were yelling F-bombs at each other and threatening to punch each other in the face immediately afterwards. And I hope that we can get back to that type of conversation or type of feel where things aren't so polarizing and dysregulating. I really hope on this next little period we can do that. I think with sports, it gives us the best opportunity to get to that place.
Yeah, I think Brian White did offer a good answer on that, as good an answer as you can, especially as somebody that's played for the U.S. national team and wants to represent that country more, regardless of who the leader is. You want to represent your country on the international stage, and so he handled that in the right way. So I don't necessarily blame him on that, but it would also be refreshing to see a single American athlete in Canada to just show some attention to the entire situation, because it seems like a lot necessarily aren't clued into what it actually means. And it would be good to see one athlete in Canada. And there's a lot of American athletes in Canada, and we haven't really seen one speak up about it yet.
Well, hey, if the other Kachuk was still in Calgary, I think you might hear some things. I don't know if it would bring us closer to that non-polarizing discourse that I'm yearning for. So give it some time. This isn't going away anytime soon, Ben.
Yeah, it depends. Brian White too. I'm not expecting a whole lot on that front from him, just because he's so carefully guarded with what he says, and he's like, that's why he's always he's perfect for the Whitecaps to throw up, because White's always going to be a team first guy. He's going to defer to, that even himself when he scores boatloads of goals. He's not going to be one to talk about himself. He'll be like, scored a hat trick. It's like, well, I got 3 great assists. It's like, well, but Brian, like, you scored a bicycle. No. It was like great assist. I just happy to score, happy to win. Most importantly, and you're like, okay. It's also personality, right? Like the reality is a lot of these American athletes, unless and the ones that will, maybe it seems like it's more of the T'Chuk variety where they're just going to kind of say some nonsense. But I think that's probably why Jesse Marsch's comments carried so much, because in a world where a lot of athletes will, refer to the team first and, want to avoid the limelight, can't blame them as well, because anything they say close to out of context is going to blow up on social media and they're going to get attacked. It's easy to understand why they would avoid doing that, especially, and coaches as well. So the fact that Jesse Marsch is an American coaching America, remember when his passport was a problem, by the way, to coach a Canadian national team? It seems like those days are long gone, but he decided to just say what he felt, and he did it in such a perfect way. His words were clear. There was intention. There was meaning. He tied the political situation into the situation of the team too. Like, he found a way to be like, also, look, like, these guys, they know the situation. Like, they live the situation. They're Canadian. They represent what it means to be Canadian. I think that's probably why, Ben mentions we have that yearn from wanting to hear more from athletes, like Brendan says, the discourse, but also the reality is the political climate doesn't necessarily open the doors. So it is always cool to see a guy like Jesse Marsch break down those sort of doors that we sometimes see put up.
He takes it off his players too, right? Like, obviously the questions are going to come up for Fonzie as the captain, and I think that Fonzie will have a similar answer to Brian White, albeit maybe with more passion. It's certainly more, I think, affecting for someone like Alphonso Davies than Brian White, let's say, in this actual example. But I feel like Marsch is that type of guy that knows, as we say with coaches all the time in all sports, where they take the heat off the players and they put it on themselves. That's what I think that Marsch was doing in a grander scale, and I think it's positive.
We'll jump into the actual soccer side of it as well. Jesse Marsch, of course, has a big month on his hands with the Canadian men's national team. He released his 60-man roster, preliminary roster for the CONCACAF Nations League, and there's tough choices on this roster to cut it down to just 23 players. From Doublet, there's tough choices to be made from getting the roster from 60 to 23. On the wings, do you see a tough decision for Marsch deciding between Hoylett and Nelson being brought into the squad, assuming Tajon Schaaf and Ahmed are locks? Schaafberg, I don't know whether he's a lock. He has not featured for Nashville much this season. He's been nursing a bit of an injury. There's been potential rumors of trades as well from Nashville. Jay Nelson, I would think, probably has to be the guy coming in instead of Junior Hoylett, Alex.
Say precision of language. We are 2 games into the season, and Nashville hasn't played any CONCACAF games. So saying hasn't featured much seems a bit of a hyperbole, but I digress. No need to be the language police. I just thought that was funny. But with Schaaffelberg,
a bilingual guy, trilingual or 2.5 languages is the language police. Yeah, surprise.
I mean, shout out to the guy that put some of the clips from that we're posting on Twitter and Instagram into French, because I've never been able to speak French, and that was C'est magnifique.
It's scary, believable. Like, it was too good, man.
Terrifying AI, terrifying. But with Schaaffelberg, I think he, for me, remains a lock because he was upgraded to questionable this weekend. I think that seems to indicate he's fine, because the thing with Schaaffelberg, you can get a good 10 out of him, and that's you're okay with that. Like Trinidad and Tobago last year, that was a good 10, comes off the bench, scores a big goal. You're getting that. And I think it's important to have a few guys like that. With Schaaffelberg, yes, it's probably he's not going to start this tournament, which is, too bad for him, because had he been fit, he's in that contention, as we know. But I think with Schaaffelberg, even when he's not starting, as we've learned, there's been debates. Is he arguably better off the bench? The Nelson versus Hoylett one's going to be interesting, because when you look through the squad, you look at the injuries, especially Sam Adekugbe picks up a quad, thankfully not a knee, but still quad, if it's a strain. We didn't hear if it's a tear or strain or whatnot. It sounds like it's weeks. Reading between the lines, no Nations League for him. That does open the door to bring another winger, because you have enough fullback cover in the squad regardless. Like Richie Larea can shift over to left back. Nico Seeger can drop back to fullback. It allows you to bring either a Hoylett or a Nelson. it's tough because I think Hoylett kind of fits that category of, you're going to get a good 15 from him. It's late in the game. You need quality. He did it against Suriname. He scores a big goal. Jesse Marsch had great things to say. We kind of forget that Hoylett hasn't featured a lot in this squad under Marsch because he was injured for Copa America. Then he was building his way back up. He's experienced. He's a guy who deserves a trophy for what he's given to this group. I think for Jaden Nelson, as much as his early season form warrants a look, I just think a Hoylett, considering all the circumstances, is going to have a key edge. And I think it's going to make it a little harder for Nelson to be brought. I think he's going to have to sustain his form and maybe look at a Gold Cup because I think Hoylett, we forget what he can bring to the table, even though he always seems to find a way to remind us.
Yeah, very well said. I totally see that. That Nelson's opportunity here will be in the Gold Cup, and he could be a star and a standout the way Ali Ahmed was a few years ago, and the way Schaffelberg and Ahmed were even at Copa last year. I do think that there's, it's nice to have this debate and the plethora of options that Jesse Marsch has, because when Canada went to the World Cup, 2.5 years ago, we had nowhere near the depth to be able to talk like this, and you were really reaching to try and find some alternatives. Even the fact that you say, using Nico Seeger at fullback, I wonder if that's just forcing him onto the field to get your best talent on the field, in a similar way that we've debated forever about how to use Alphonso Davies with other pieces. But it's nice that we'll have 2 major tournaments this year to maybe see Jesse Marsch play around with that.
And from Christian Ganter, would losing to Mexico in the semifinal be seen as a failure? I think it has to be. The standard's been set there for Canada in CONCACAF, in CONMEBOL, even given last year's Copa America, that they have to go out and they have to beat Mexico. And if they haven't, then that's a bit of a step back from where they were, the teams that they were competing with. And when you're looking at World Cup preparation as well, these are the teams that you have to beat. You have to play the games that matter. I asked Jesse Marsch after the semifinal loss at Copa America just how much it mattered to play these, critical games, get more games with big stakes. And there's not that opportunity for this Canadian team if they don't beat Mexico. They need that final. They need the pressure of a trophy on the line, because ideally they want to be facing pressure similar to that at the World Cup a year from now. And then, they want to have similar situations with a different group of players and some of the same players at the Gold Cup as well. But they absolutely have to beat Mexico. And if they don't, it's an absolute failure.
I disagree. I think it's a massive missed opportunity. A failure would mean that they are, in fact, worse off than they were before. And I disagree that would be the case. This is going to be a home match for Mexico. The Mexican national team is I think, in a better place heading into this window into 25 than they were in 24. So they will have all of the pressure. Canada's had some great results recently against opposition where they couldn't share the field with. We have this expectation, very much so, that Canada could win and maybe feel like should win. But I really think if they lose in that semi in a tight game, or they lose 2-0 and they've played their way, we will be talking about it, and we will find ways to speak positively about it and not feel so end of the world, because there is still an opportunity in the summer, with a very different team in the Gold Cup. But I really think it will be more so a massively missed opportunity to have that final and play against the States than an absolute failure, as you coined it.
So yeah, I say we just can't get caught too far in the narratives, because I think for the narratives this is Canada's best team. This is a moment for them to become the kings of CONCACAF. For Mexico on their side, this is one of the worst Mexico teams. This is a team, that's in ruin compared to where they were 5, 10, 15 years ago. At the same time, Canada hasn't beat a team like this in a situation like this, if you think about it, in this generation, because every time they've made a step forward, it's always been the US Mexico kind of like a wall stopping them. I think 2021 Gold Cup, they make a great run of the semifinals, lose to Mexico. In the Nations League in 2023, where they made the final, they get there beating a Panama. They didn't have a statement win over a Mexico or the US. Then they fell to the US in the final itself. The reality is they don't have that win under their belt of you beat a US or Mexico in like a semifinal or a final. So the fact they can achieve both in a matter of a week, it's great. But at the same time, they haven't done that. That isn't something where we've looked like this team's been there. This group is still in a phase where they have to get over that hump. So I think because of that, it isn't an absolute failure because it is a big hump to get over. Despite Mexico's failures, they still have some good talent. They're a veteran team. They're going to kick the shit out of Canada, which is not fun in a game like that. Fans, like you mentioned, are going to be pro-Mexico. I think there's many reasons where Canada could fall in a one-off game. They haven't been together in 5 months too. All those sort of factors. So I think it's something for Canada. I'll be gravely disappointed if they don't win, because this is a sort of moment where they can prove they level up as a team, and this will bode well. But to position it as a failure, I think, is disrespectful to Mexico, and I don't think that's fair to them, given the sort of credence they still carry in a sort of game like this.
If they don't win, if Canada doesn't win, does this change your expectations for the World Cup next year? Like we've been talking about best case scenario being a quarterfinal, heck, even a semifinal. We've talked about it at points if everything goes perfectly right. Does this change the expectations or hopes for the World Cup next year if Canada, goes out and loses 2-0 and looks kind of listless against Mexico, Brendan?
Who's talking about Canada reaching the semifinal of the World Cup next year?
I think we mentioned it back in the summer.
That's
it's it's a very if the bracket lines up,
yeah,
like it's not
the same way that it was miraculous Morocco reached the semifinals at the World Cup in Qatar. I suppose that there's obviously a statistical possibility of that. When it comes to expectation or measurement, I think that's not productive at all. To kind of have that thought. To your original question of does this change expectations ahead of the World Cup? If they do go through this year without having won the Nations League or without having won the Gold Cup, I do think that there will be a mental block that they have and a lot of self-doubt within the team that could hinder them at the World Cup next year. And where the belief that we just spoke about, like, well, it could happen to reach the semifinal, isn't even there. So I do think that it would be much better for the psyche of the team as a whole, in addition to the competitive experience, that they win a trophy this year. And I would feel like at the end of it, I would feel as though not coming away with one trophy at all this year. I'd be more inclined to start using that word failure. Not absolute and grave failure as you described, but I would be more inclined to lean that way. I do think that this year ends with Canada winning at least one trophy.
They do need the statement victory, I think, because if you're going to go in the World Cup and realistically look like something where I think, again, as a host, it's not always fully realistic, but as a host, you should always believe you can make a run because you're going to get a favorable draw. You're going to be in pot one. Things are going to line up for you. You're going to be playing games at home. It's not unreasonable, but if I'm looking at it from Canada's perspective, until they get a statement win, their road to a semifinal is going to lie kind of like Copa, if you think about it. Like Copa, for as fun as the run is, if you're actually going to sit back and break it down now that we've had some chance to look at it, like getting past Chile and Peru isn't as big of an achievement as it felt at the time, just because this isn't the Peru of the last 5 years. This Chile team is not the team that won back-to-back Copa Americas. Even getting past Venezuela, that's a team that historically underperforms in big moments. They've never made a World Cup. They've never made the semis of a Copa America. The reality is, in this tournament, Canada still did fall up short against Argentina. That's not a bad thing. It's not like suggesting, they've lost Argentina, like this is a terrible team. But the reality is, in most scenarios, if you're going to make a deep run at the World Cup, you're going to have to beat Argentina. You're going to have to beat a team of that caliber. Heck, even against Uruguay, they came close to doing it, and they kind of threw it away in a moment where, yes, it's a third place game, but they could have at least been like, look, we beat Uruguay. Like, we've been there, done that. So I think that for me, this Nations League represents a moment to, like I mentioned earlier, they don't have a statement win like that against the U.S. or Mexico. That's a good place to start, because the reality is U.S., Mexico, they're top 15, top 20 teams on paper until proven otherwise. If you can beat them in a moment like this, it at least gives you a little more confidence that if they head into a game against, I don't know, Germany in the round of 16, you're like, okay, Canada, at least they've proven they can go out there and give it a shot. Whereas right now, all we know is that they'll go out and give them a good game, but they still are technically looking for that first marquee statement win.
And from ONW, has Marsch and the CSA made any groundwork on the Gold Cup schedule of preparation, friendlies for the June window? We still don't know all the teams that are going to be in the Gold Cup. I was actually looking at, potential schedules yesterday as I start to plan now what the summer looks like in terms of where Canada and I want to be. Doesn't look like I'll make it down to LA, unfortunately. I hope to make that work. But what do you see about planning these friendlies ahead of the Gold Cup, and are there going to be any, or is this just not a window where it's necessarily a possibility for Canada outside of maybe some training ground friendlies against MLS Next Pro teams or something like that?
The window you're speaking of is specifically the end of the European season window, that May, early June before. They will have a friendly for sure. I don't know if we're looking at them, to be honest, having a friendly against an opposition that better prepares them for that tournament. What I mean by that is if there's an opportunity to have some of the players that will not be included in the Gold Cup team that you would call Canada's top 8 to come into an end of club season camp. This gets tricky with Alphonso Davies, for example, who's going to have the Club World Cup, let's say. But it provides the opportunity maybe for him to participate in a camp. And I think in Jesse Marsch's eyes, if there's an opportunity to get a more marquee matchup against and a friendly against a team that's not CONCACAF level opposition, that would be a good opportunity to get that window. I don't know if that works out for an England or a Spain, but those federations want the gates of a North American audience. I think they like the test as well. I think Canada's in a much more appealing place than even when they booked those France and Netherlands friendlies for last year. So I would like to see that in that May-June window where you have the opportunity to use some of those guys, Stachio, David, Davies, in the team, even though they're unlikely to feature in the Gold Cup. I wouldn't have a problem with that at all.
Of course, we broached this question the week where I think about 2-3 weeks ago we had something like this on the rundown. Never got to it. I'd laid out a bunch of like potential teams they could play, and I don't have that handy right now. But I agree with the June window and the framework that's one where it's perfect. Like I don't think Club World Cup commitments start yet. Players are around. It's something if you can get a good game, I think Canada takes it, but it's not Gold Cup prep. I think it's just very different. But like Africa's available, for example. I think Senegal's traveling to Nottingham to play England that tournament or that window. Maybe there's something where you get in on that. If not, maybe you could invite an African team. Maybe you call in Morocco. You build up a relationship with the World Cup. Maybe you call in a team of that caliber to come to Canada. Because I know there is a push to want to play more friendlies in Canada, because you do got to drum up interest ahead of the World Cup. You got to show that the stadiums are capable of hosting national team games, especially when grass goes down at BC Place. Because I know that's a matter of months before that's put in place, because they want it in place this year. I know some European teams are available. Like I think Switzerland was one of the teams that came up in my research, which, hey, it's not a bad team. I would not mind at all a friendly against Switzerland in Canada. If you get like a friendly against Switzerland and Morocco, and those are your two teams, that's pretty darn good prep. Like those are top 20, top 30 teams. And I think Canada's working towards that. So we'll see how that goes. And in terms of Gold Cup, yeah, I'd agree with Ben. Like maybe you get like they did in 2019, it was, where you played Trinidad and Tobago in a closed door friendly, you get some local guys, but ultimately that camp is going to be all about integrating new faces, and I'm less worried about how that works out, so to say.
Yeah, that's kind of what I would expect. But I do like the idea of some more competitive friendlies, especially potentially similar friendlies to what we'll see against Wales and Romania in October as well. And from not the Chris Paul you're looking for on Blue Sky. Sorry,
just to Alex's point there, because I think you threw out some great countries that I feel like would kind of be in that tier, and kind of in the middle of my point and your point there, where I think like Senegal would be great, Switzerland would be great, and I also think to the point of showing off the country, what it's like to host in this country. It doesn't have to be at BMO. It doesn't have to be at BC Place. I would love, you can book Senegal and Morocco in Montreal. I know it's 20,000. You're not looking at the same gate revenue. That match would be electric. That would be such a great atmosphere.
All the Senegalese people in Montreal, it'd be a party out there, man.
Yeah, but you know what? I also think it's great to test. Another thing that opportunity that gives, it gives Canadians who maybe have been here for 2 years, maybe have been here for 20 years, maybe are second or third generation, and forever cheered for the nation of their heritage. Now they have that moment to cheer for both. Now they have that moment to decide, right? And with Senegal in Morocco, two massive populations in the greater Montreal area.
Like that Algeria and Montreal would be a heck of a game to throw that out there as well.
Would be amazing as well. But you're not going to get the the blue Honduran wave of the mid 2000s. You're not going to get we've had that in Toronto as well. The yellow Jamaican wave that come through BMO in years past when Jamaica would come up to play. It wouldn't be like that. It would be it would have a pulse of both nations. It would still be predominantly red, and I think it'd be a great experience for all those fans. I wasn't doing the show with you guys when the World Cup draw happened ahead of 2022. I wanted Portugal and Canada to draw in the same group so bad, guys. I wanted to feel that. I wanted to feel what it was like to look at the nation I've cheered for decades, tournament after tournament after tournament, and be like, man, today you need to lose because Canada's going to beat you. I really want Canada to beat you. I really wanted that feeling and that experience. It would be great if Canada Soccer can give Canadian fans that experience with opponents that they may never come up against in the World Cup, but that would make Canadians really feel something.
And from not the Chris Paul you're looking for as well. Here's a name you haven't heard in a minute, Marcelo Flores. Is he still eligible to switch? And for June, it'll be 3 years since the Mexican call-up. Do you think he'd be interested in Canada? And do you think there would still be interest in him? Would he fit with the program, Alex?
Oh, Marcelo Flores in the big year 2025. What?
Just wait till the next question.
Yeah, I know. We're really going for it. But, I mean, technically, if I'm not mistaken, he's still only 21 because with all the rules, it's, under 21. He only has 3 caps for Mexico. It is all possible. I think the reality is, like, Marcelo Flores made the choice to go to Mexico. You maybe saw there's a little less winger depth. And as I mentioned earlier, this is, one of Mexico's worst generations. They're still relying on a lot of older players. They're almost begging for young talent to come through and integrate. And the fact that Flores hasn't kind of tells you where his career's gone. Like when we're having these discussions, he was in Europe. You're kind of hoping, okay, maybe even if he doesn't break through at Arsenal, maybe he goes to a championship club, maybe he goes to a League One club, maybe he goes to Spain, a Segunda, like finds his feet somewhere. He's gone back to Mexico, and the reality is he just hasn't performed at the level there that you want to see, given the pedigree, given the hype. So something where, hey, if Marcelo Flores is open to switch, you don't say no because it's more depth. Right? Like if anyone wants to switch, you're always going to say yes, but you're just going to have to be real that it would be very far down the pecking order. Heck, you look at a guy playing in Mexico, Santiago Lopez, okay, maybe he hasn't quite hit the heights of a Flores, but given his age, given his potential, you'd almost be wanting to see more of a Lopez before you see more from a Flores, because at Flores' age, you really want to see, tangible production. So I think that's something where even if he does make the switch, I think for him, whatever's going to be best for him comes from him just really dominating and blowing up and hitting the levels he can in Liga MX.
I agree with Alex there. You don't want to say no to someone who's up for it, even if they realistically don't get in the team or don't become a regular in the squad. Obviously, he's someone that has a talent and Canada wanted a look at before and considered very seriously. So it'd be great to see his career progress to the point where we're talking about him in a Canadian national team shirt. I did have a thought about you guys when I was watching Villa in the Champions League, and they made a note about Marco Asensio had come on. I forget the stat now, whether he's had the most sub appearances in the Champions League like ever in the Champions League era, or whether the most goals per substitute appearance in the Champions League, but something specific to that. And which the note is, well, there's a lot more subs allowed now. Like since the pandemic, we've allowed the 5 substitutes. So there should be an asterisk next to that type of tally. And I was thinking about FIFA switches too. As we expand and continually include more and more tournaments, this is not going away, right? 3 new expanded women's club tournaments. The email today, the Club World Cup that Gianni would love to do annually. And they'll expand that to 48 teams, 72. I don't know the math. It's only going to go up, right? I do think that they will
women's
change.
tournament 19.
They will change the FIFA Switch eligibility. I think that there will be a change to that, where honestly maybe you even get to do it twice. If you don't have X number of caps in 2, pick some window, 5 years or maybe even 8 years, let's say, that you have the opportunity to make 2 switches. I could very much see that. I think that they are going to, because what happens if you stay this strict and you add these games, there will be a dilution of the quality of these games. So you want to try to avoid that. I think this is one simple way for them to make a change to at least slow that dilution.
I wonder if they again, questions. This is just off the top of my head, but I mean, it is an increasingly globalized world. More and more people are holding multiple passports. I wonder if they kind of open the door for just more window shopping, so to speak. I know it's complicated, but maybe they just make it that before you're 21, you're allowed 3 games with each nation you're eligible for, provided you have the passport, something like that, where if the opportunity comes, you can kind of try, because it is such a tricky conversation, because from FIFA's standpoint, you want to make it as clear as possible in terms of you don't want people exploiting the system, because at the end of the day, it's a business and people will do what caters to them. At the same time, it is hard to dictate young people who've grown up in multinational families, households where one side of the family has raised you this way, one side of the family has raised you that way, and then you're growing up in the culture that you're in, which might also be different. It is also tough to tell those kids you have to be one nationality. And I do wonder if there's some sort of flexibility that allows, at least when you're younger, when there's less, because once you get to the top level and there's more money involved, more tournaments involved, it gets complicated. But maybe at younger levels, to at least have the tries and make it slightly less strict.
And from Niles Guo, outside of Dane Sinclair, Milan Borjan is probably the most informed Canadian goalkeeper right now in Saudi Arabia. Is there a chance we could see him in a camp? I know he didn't leave on a high note, and I don't know if he's interested if he's not starting. Would Marsch consider him as an experienced number 2? I was looking up the amount of languages you could possibly say not a chance in earlier today.
Give us the Arabic. Give us the Arabic. Go on. Give it.
I'm blanking out on what it was. I texted it to you guys earlier. La Tujad Fursa is Arabic for not a chance. I don't think Milan Borjan has any desire to get back into the Canadian national team. I don't think Jesse Marsch even has Milan Borjan's phone number at this point. Not a chance. There's young Canadian goalkeepers that you could call up. There's Maxime Crépeau. There's Tom McGill, Jonathan Sirois. He is so far down the list that he could keep 50 clean sheets in a row, and I don't think he's getting a call.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it's something. No, and I think for something, I get the question because Josh, JJD TV, and I had a running joke last year because this has been going on for a while. Every time, because we still have them on FUTMOB notifications. Every 3 days, you'd get a notification. Milan Borjan, 7.8 rating. Milan Borjan, 8.2 rating. His team lost 2-0. He was still player of the match. And we were just laughing about how he's living his best life in Saudi on a team that actually isn't that good, but he probably doesn't mind because he's just getting peppered, actually putting in good performances.
Didn't even know there was another team in Riyadh, and they're called Al Riyadh.
Which is hilarious that he's playing for if you look at their logo and everything, it's very generic, FIFA create a team kind of vibes I'm getting from the team. Yeah. Probably getting a nice bag to play in Riyadh. That's for sure. But the reality is that, if Canada wasn't in the situation they are with goalkeepers, there is maybe a world where he could be a good third goalkeeper just to have in terms of experience. But I think now the reality is guys like Max Crépeau, Dane Sinclair have accumulated enough experience that they themselves are, Crépeau's in his 30s now. Sinclair's pushing his late 20s. Their experience, they've been number ones for a while now. They've been in this group. And there's just too many young guys pushing. There's just too many Tom McGills, Owen Goodmans, Jonathan Sirois, guys coming out. Max Anchors, Isaac Bomers, if you're looking at the Whitecaps, Adisa Di Rosario, if you're going to go to Toronto FC, Emil Gazdov. There's just so many young guys constantly coming through that there's just no reason to get in the way of that and opening competition, especially if you don't need that leadership void. But no, I thought it is a fun question, and certainly it'll be fun to see how Borjan's career progresses now that he's in this Saudi era. One thing though I will say, because we've talked about Steven Vittoria a few weeks ago, talked about Milan Borjan, Atiba Hutchins we've talked about. I do wonder if the 2026 World Cup is the perfect moment to honor all those guys, because we've talked in the past about how it has been a bit weird. They just kind of retired and we haven't heard much from them, and we wondered about a testimonial. Maybe the start of the World Cup is the perfect place where the country will be watching, people will be there, and you can be look, this national team, they're in a great spot. They're about to be at a World Cup where we're actually sitting here being they can get out the group and maybe make some noise. It would be cool to honor some of those guys who helped get the team there, because Borjan, Hutchinson, Vittoria, they've all played a big role in that. And you don't want to forget them completely.
And from Christian Ganter, lastly, any thoughts on the whole Boy Wonder partnership and the proposed World Cup ticket stuff? Certainly an interesting announcement from Canada Soccer, a new music ambassador, Boy Wonder. He's done a number of things within the music industry over the last 30 years or so. Brendan, I know neither of us went to the announcement, but it seems like a new cool thing that Canada Soccer is doing, and another sort of Kevin Blue special with the Canada Red partnership and philanthropic sort of setup.
Yeah, it seems smart. I mean, the boy wonder thing, it's reminiscent of the Raptors pairing with Drake almost 10 years ago now. It's 2016. The Raptors made him the official ambassador, and they didn't know how to explain that or didn't know what that would be. But as Drake continued to elevate his brand, the Raptors were flag was flying alongside him. So I think it's smart. And also, Drake would be more A-list, and Drake's in the suites with Gianni Infantino. He's too high. He's graduated to VVIP. He's also more polarizing, which I think is good. So it seems like, Boy Wonder's going to enjoy this project. I think we've all seen Fonzie, spit a verse about his new contract. I got to imagine that he'll be involved as well. And I think it's a good concept. And I know that the Canada Red membership tier has a split reaction on Blue Sky and Twitter. But this is not new. Other countries do this. The reality is it's a smart revenue strategy for a federation that honestly should have been doing this 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So I don't disagree with it as much as, I know it will leave some people out, and it rubs some people the wrong way. It's kind of shows the evolution of Canada Soccer as a product now and where it's at. And this is where it should be at.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Clubs have membership fees that they pay for. In Europe, you can't go to a match unless you are buying a membership to a club. So yeah, it's something that is pretty standard across the world and is just kind of foreign to North America, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the revenue streams, I mean, it makes sense. We've spent a lot of time talking about how Canada Soccer can increase the revenue in philanthropic ways as the Kevin Blue special, and it's fascinating to see that this is one of the ways they're going to go about it with music, a well-known face in that. And in terms of the memberships, it makes sense. I will say though, from a fan perspective, I would be a bit worried about how it's the World Cup's in 14 months, and the reality is we don't know a whole lot of anything about how ticketing is going to look. I do worry about how vague things are, and even from Canada's perspective, I guess it's hard to point the finger at them completely, because I know I saw a lot of questions of what's the point of paying for these memberships for? And it says there's a chance at World Cup tickets, but I think that's also Canada kind of being stuck with FIFA being so vague. And I'm very curious to see what happens, because in the last few World Cups, we've seen it. Qataris, the locals got better World Cup ticket prices, so they'd be encouraged to go. We saw it in Russia. I think we saw it in Brazil, South Africa, and you'd kind of hope the same is replicated in Canada, US, and Mexico, but you kind of worry with just the money involved in this here, and the nature of how tickets are. We've seen the Super Bowl, how it becomes a meme every year, how it becomes more and more expensive. As soon as there's a sporting event worth anything, there's all of a sudden it's 10 grand to get in the door. I just worry that FIFA is going to exploit that, and as a Canadian, I'd be very frustrated, because ultimately this tournament coming to the country should be a great news, and I do worry that fans are going to get completely screwed and priced over, and so far a lot of the vague language doesn't help with that notion.
MLS back as well. Whitecaps off to a hot start this season. They won their first two games of the MLS season, beating LA Galaxy 2-1. CF Montreal lost 1-0 to Minnesota United. Taniela Oosay looked good in that one. And TFC are showing they can score and from distance, but can't defend much as they fell 4-2 to Orlando City. Brendan, your thoughts on the second weekend of MLS being back?
Yeah, it was a good weekend. Another good performance from the Whitecaps. I'm excited to see them against Monterrey. That'll be tonight. If you're listening to this, you'll probably already have seen the scoreline. But I wore my Jesper Sorensen-inspired sweater to feel comfortable and a little more Scandinavian on this show. The Whitecaps are a fun team to watch, man. I would say of the three Canadian teams, they are the one that perhaps I was the most curious about, but not the most excited about. And small sample size here. I've had 4 games, so that's 2 more to the benefit. But I'm excited to see the Caps. They have, for the last few years, really been a team that's worth staying up for. If you don't live out there on the West Coast, they have absolutely lived up to that. And I'm a little surprised that CF Montreal have kind of struggled out the gate. TFC kind of are what I thought they would be, and to be honest, I don't think they can find them themselves until they sort out the Lorenzo Insigne scenario. situation. Jason Hernandez made a comment to, I believe his name was Chris McKee, reporter at the Toronto event the other day, about the expansion of BMO Field, and when asked about Lorenzo Insigne off camera, to which Jason Hernandez said, "I would have answered that on camera if you had asked it." Was that who knows? Maybe we'll see Lorenzo Insigne. It's a coach's decision. Which I thought was interesting because it kind of puts the onus on Robin Fraser, but at the same time, you've not really closed the door, and you're not publicly leaning towards the buyout, which is everyone's belief. So it's a weird limbo that I think TFC really need to sort. It's to their advantage to sort this sooner rather than later.
Yeah, well summed up. I mean, with the Whitecaps, the big thing that stood out, seeing them live twice now, it's cool to just see them control games more. Just, play on the front foot, control defensively, get rid of some of the chaos by holding the ball a bit more, stringing passes around. We were kind of talking with Ben the other day, just how, it's such a departure because the best Whitecap teams, be it under Carl Robinson and Vanni Sartini, there was just like counter-attacking, free-flowing, and it's been fascinating to see them evolve early days into a bit more of a possession team because it suits this group. TFC, it's TFC. They can score and they can't defend. It's something where it's going to take a lot of work to sort out the defensive side of the games. And yeah, the Insigne situation doesn't help. But even if on the field, probably is similar, right? Maybe he gives you another goal and you give up another goal more. And that's the kind of challenge of dealing with that. And Montreal, we'll have to see. For them, though, the big challenge every year is just the whole swath of away games. Can you survive the difficulty of it? And unfortunately, they've, early days, but it's never easy playing the road in MLS, and they're kind of feeling that early on.
And Brendan just off to fulfill his real dad duties, not just Northern Football dad duties, going to pick up Rock from daycare. But we'll jump into Canadians abroad as well. Big week for Canadians abroad. Alistair Johnston, rumors to Fulham. No concrete links there, but interesting to see David Ornstein mention that the English club is one of a few interested in the Canadian international. Something to watch despite Johnston recently signing that new Celtic contract and, of course, reaching 100 appearances with Celtic as well. In Europe, a good weekend to be a David. Promise scored in a 4-1 win over Dender. Meanwhile, Jonathan came off the bench and scored in Lille's 4-1 loss to PSG. The reason he was benched, to stay fresh for the UCL in midweek, and he used his fresh legs to provide an assist in a crucial 1-1 away draw to Dortmund in the first leg of their round of 16 tie. Meanwhile, Evelyn Vienne scored in a 4-3 loss to Juventus. A good week in MLS for Canadians too. Jason Russell-Rowe scored his second goal in 2 games, and it was a real goal this time as Columbus won 1-0 over New England. Tenny Oluwaseyi had an assist in Minnesota United's aforementioned 1-0 win over Montreal, and he's looked dynamic and good with Kelvin Yeboah up top for Minnesota to start the season. And James Pantemis had a clean sheet in Portland's 1-0 win over Austin, which was certainly a bounce back for Portland after the debacle against the Whitecaps the week before. You can check out Canucks-Abroad for more on Blue Sky and Twitter and Instagram, wherever you can find them. They also have a great website with Canadian schedules and Canadians abroad. The hundreds of Canadians playing overseas, even in the 4th divisions of Estonia that you've never necessarily heard about, with clubs that you can only imagine exist. But what were your takeaways this week from Canadians abroad, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, David's scoring, we were used to that, both of them. So cool. Cool, I guess. It's kind of funny how just like Promise David in his first year at Union Saint-Gilloise, it's just like every week, goal, assist. You're like, oh, like, that's the standard. And same thing with Jonathan David. Great to see him again. Big moments, UCL, big clubs. Now they head back to Lille and they have a real chance to advance, which would be huge for him and the club. So excited with that. Evelyn Vienne, like just, good that she's been dealing with a lot of injuries lately, that she's back scoring, assisting. Big role to play under Casey Stoney, so I'll be keeping an eye on that. The MLS guys, Jason Russell-Rowe, I really think he's grabbed the inside track to be in this Nations League squad. So that's just good to see from his perspective, stepping up in Cucho Hernandez's absence. But the Alistair Johnston of Fulham, I am interested in that. We'll see what happens there, but I think that's really fascinating. Fulham's interesting because I know they had, a right back, Tet. I don't want to say the wrong name. I think it's Kenny Tate. Dutch fullback. He was injured. He was the starting right back. The backup's Timothy Castagne, former Leicester fullback. He's been starting. But I do wonder if they're looking at that depth. What's nice is Johnson can play in a back 3. Fulham have kind of switched between a 3 and a 4 this year. If not, Johnson would be a very capable wing back or fullback, as we know. And that's good to know because we've mentioned in the past, he has the passport. He's performed so well for Celtic. Celtic often ends up being a jumping ground for players to make the leap up to the Premier League, and he just screams like a Premier League player. So I'd love to see him make that move, given his age, given that he's about to play in a home World Cup. I just feel like there's a move like that in place, but we'll see if it happens this summer. But definitely with that new contract, teams are going to have to pay up. And if he keeps playing the way he is, I think they'll be willing to drop a little cash.
And CPL, a couple of big transfers as well. Emil Gazdov made the move to CF Montreal from Pacific for a club record fee. And James Cameron made the move to the Colorado Rapids second team, although a nice spin there from Vancouver FC to say it was to the Colorado Rapids first team. It does look like it's an MLS Next Pro contract as he looks to follow in the footsteps of Mo Farsi, who was good for Columbus on the weekend as well. We forget about Mo Farsi sometimes because he's not representing Canada, but he's also sort of taken it by the scruff of the neck for Columbus this season too.
Yeah, it hurts when he assists Jason Russell-Rowe and you can be like, the all-Canadian link-up, and you're like, just, the Algerian-Canadian link-up, sort of. So, no, I think for James Cameron, it's like with those next pro moves, as we've seen, it's a matter of opportunity, fit, timing. Like, you have a Lowell Wright where he goes to Whitecaps, doesn't work out, and you have a Mo Farsi who goes to Columbus and it works out perfectly, right? Like, there's just some where it's all about timing, because who knows, maybe the Rapids open up a spot at right back next year and he's golden, or they sign a new right back and it ends up being the wrong move. But with Cameron, as we've learned with him, like he's an absolute dog. Like he is going to go out and earn his spot. Like this is a guy who was, playing high school soccer 2-3 years ago. I had no idea he'd become a pro. He went to trials and just impressed everyone with how hard he was willing to work. And that pushed him to be, a very solid CPL fullback to make his youth national team. So I wouldn't bet against him. And I think it makes sense that he's making a bet like this because he's made a habit of betting on himself. With Gazdov, what's cool is that there's more of a pipeline straight away. Like he's going into the first team. There's a little more open competition with Montreal. They've shown in the past they were willing to give Sirois a chance when he came in. Same way Pantemis got a chance. Breza, like they're willing to give goalkeepers a chance. So I don't think he'll be displacing Sirois right away. I think ideally from a Canadian perspective, maybe Sirois makes a move elsewhere and then there's room for all of them to play. But good situation for Gazdov to learn while knowing that like he'll probably get minutes in a cup. They are in Leagues Cup this summer too. Maybe there's room for him to hop into Leagues Cup. And because Gazdov, hey, he's still only U21. He's as far as goalies go, he's essentially a baby, so that you can say. But he won the goalkeeper of the year. He had a great season, so he's also ready for that step. So I think Montreal is going to be a good spot because they've been patient with young goalkeepers, whereas other clubs can't always say the same.
That's all we've got for episode 218 of the Northern Fútbol Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Of course, you can watch us on the 90th Minute on YouTube and find us on all your preferred podcast platforms. And we're everywhere on social media as well. So definitely follow us there. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll be back next time.